Okay, I've got a handout here today. Isn't that exciting? It's not really all that exciting handout, but I'll pass them out. If somebody would come and, Brad or somebody, anybody who would like to pass these out, just make sure everybody gets one. I hope there's enough. Thank you. Sorry, I don't know why I did that, Brad.
Got pictures?
No, there are no pictures. Why? Who needs the pictures?
I ain't gonna say Ken.
Okay. I'm sure he's very happy about that. Oh. So these are the texts, and I rarely do this in a sermon because I tend to take one text, and that'll be the text for the sermon. But in this instance, there's a different set of categories here that really can't be taken up in one text. So if you like looking the stuff up as you go, I wanted everybody to have this sheet of paper. You know, as we come to Easter, there are some things about Jesus' life here on this Palm Sunday. This is the day in which Jesus rode in on the donkey's colt, and they laid the palm branches in front of him. And there are things about that entry into Jerusalem, and also the things about Jesus' life that teach us things that really can't be taught in any way except by an example. And his whole life, and even the way he came into Jerusalem that day, with everybody saying Hosanna and throwing the palm branches down as though he's a conquering hero, he comes in on a donkey's colt instead of coming in on a horse. If he'd have come in on a horse, that would have been the Davidic expectation that they had. Here comes David to conquer the Romans and drive them out. But he chose not to do that. He came in on a donkey's colt. Not only, I would say, actively choosing it, but also to fulfill the prophecy that was given. So let's start out in Matthew chapter 13, verse 54. It says, coming into his own country, that is Nazareth, Jesus taught them in their synagogue so that they were astonished and said, where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother named Mary and his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? So what's going on here? Well, in some ways I can understand their perspective here. Isn't this the carpenter's son? What you're seeing here is a direct effort to, in my view, and especially in the Jewish culture, to diminish Jesus. They're just trying to diminish him. Isn't this the carpenter's son? If you know anything about Jewish society, then you realize you've got the foot washing slave. That's the lowest station in the household. Then you've got a shepherd, which is close. They're not far apart. Tanners were beneath the shepherds. And then just above that are the carpenters. They were not high in the status. They weren't seen as a really super intelligent person of the intelligentsia in that history. So you've got somebody who's literally, the comment is made to diminish Jesus for his what? His birth. Think about that for a minute. Isn't this the carpenter's son? It's kind of like the Hindu caste system. You're born as a Dalit, an untouchable, because your parents were a Dalit, the untouchable. And you just have to live with that. You can't escape it your entire life here on this earth. So what's the worst condemnation that can be given to anybody except to condemn them for their birth? What's worse than that? There isn't anything. Who has responsibility for their birth? So just think of that. If I understand the Bible right, what we are, the fact that we are born from to whom we are, is God's gift to us, right? If we're made in his image. And yet I wonder what God thinks when he finds us. I mean, look at what's going on in the world today. In Syria, for instance, the war is ethnic. Ethnic war. Think about what happened in Bosnia just a few years back. People were being held responsible for their birth, and they were willing to kill each other for it. I can't think of anything worse than that. I don't know if maybe all of you in this room are old enough to remember Arthur Ashe, the tennis professional. If you ever saw an interview with Arthur Ashe, he was a believer. He rose up in the ranks in the tennis world at a time when there were no black tennis players. And there were lots of people in some of the high echelons of the tennis world that did not like the fact that this young black upstart had risen so highly into the tennis world. He was being held responsible for his birth. It's just a horror. And Jesus, son of Joseph the carpenter, right, is being held responsible for his birth. Think about that as we go forward. In Matthew chapter 8, we read this. A scribe came to Jesus, verse 19, and said, "Teacher, I'll follow you wherever you go." Jesus said to him, "The foxes have holes, the birds of the sky have nests, but I, the Son of Man, has nowhere to lay his head." Now think about what this is saying for a moment. In following what we just read regarding Jesus being the son of the carpenter. Wealth. Jesus had no wealth. He was not a wealthy person. His family wasn't wealthy. Joseph wasn't wealthy. They had all these children to take care of on a carpenter's wages, which at that time in history was very low. Abraham Lincoln said something about wealth that really struck me. And Abraham Lincoln, as you may well know, was a believer, an open believer. He said this: "Financial success is purely metallic." I thought that was a weird comment. "It produces a person with gold in their palm, silver on their tongue, brass on their face, and an iron heart." I had a relative of mine who had accumulated lots of stuff. Some of it was bought and was still in the wrappers and packages. It had never been opened to be used for anything. And I just thought, why is this happening here? What's this say? I would say it's somebody just like so many in our world who accumulate a lot, and they rest their status in that which they have accumulated. It's just crazy. Like the what's the t-shirt say? The one who dies with the most toys dies, right? Well, we could multiply the story of the miserable rich endlessly. How many movies get made about the miserable rich? How many stories have been written about the miserable rich? I love what Leona Helmsley said. You may not remember her back from the 80s. She was a big New York real estate person, kind of like Donald Trump in a way, and she said this: "Only little people pay taxes." I guess Jesus would be paying taxes because he was certainly a little person. Keep that in mind as we think about who Jesus is. In Isaiah chapter 53, we read this. Verse 1, "Who has believed our message? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before God as a tender plant, as a root out of dry ground. He has no good looks or majesty. When we see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by people, a man of suffering, acquainted with disease. He was despised as one from whom people hide their faces, and we didn't respect him." You know, in our culture, we really have a lot of investment in physical appearance, huge investment. I don't know what the cosmetic industry's budget is. I'm sure it's very large, billions of dollars, I'm sure. And we place so much emphasis on it. You know what strikes me? When I was a kid growing up, I remember watching WJXT and the 6 o'clock evening news out of Jacksonville. Those people that were on the screen, they just looked like average people. Well, watch TV today, any news report. Who do you see? Everybody's a supermodel. I mean, the people are just, you can't say anything but beautiful people. Why is that? Why is it so important that they would be so attractive? I mean, they're just reading the news after all. I don't remember the debates between Kennedy and Nixon back in 1960 when he was running for the office of president. But I remember in the history books and in all kinds of documentaries, you can see this. Eisenhower, who was the president prior, Nixon was his vice president. And Eisenhower told Nixon, he said, do not go on television. Why did he tell him to do that? Nixon wasn't good looking. JFK was. They went and had that televised debate. I don't know if you've ever seen that debate, but you look at it and what do you see? Nixon, I swear, in the debate. He's sweating. He looks like a mafia don. That's what he looks like in the debate. JFK looks calm and cool and collected and young, nice hair. Everything about him just looks great. Did you know that JFK won that presidency by 0.8% of the vote? That's all he won by. What do you think pushed him over? I'm going to say how he looked. But you know, beauty is fleeting. The Bible says Jesus didn't look like anybody that we would be attracted to on the basis of how he looked. And if we don't think that beauty is fleeting, what I would love to do, I would love to do this. I would like to take every beautiful person and find them 25 years from now and say, look at your picture then and look at your picture now. We can do the same thing, can we not? I mean, I can take my high school picture and hold it up and stand and look in the mirror and say, they seem a little different. Beauty is not going to last. It's not going to last. Go to any nursing home and you'll know that right away. Keep that in mind as we go forward. Philippians chapter 2. One of the most powerful texts with regard to who Jesus actually is if you keep reading it, but we're not going to go that far. Verse 5, have this in your mind, which was also in Christ Jesus, who existing in the form of God didn't think it equality with God a thing to be grasped after, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being made in the likeness of a man. And being found in human form, he humbled himself, being obedient to death, yes, the death on a cross. Fascinating. He emptied himself. What does that mean? He literally took everything he was and made himself of no reputation here on the earth. That's just incredible to me. Now, a good reputation is not a bad thing. It's not. I mean, we teach our children to act with integrity, to be good people so that they will have a reputation. A reputation is valuable. Proverbs is full of texts telling us to work toward a good reputation. But there's an overriding clue here in what this text is telling us. It's saying literally, this is the way the King of the universe chose to be for a reason. He's not choosing this just because he's the King of the universe and he's just saying, well, I think I'll just come in like this. No. Think about it this way. I don't know how it is for you, but it's this way for me. When I think about the glory of God, can anybody in this room really understand what that means, that statement? I really can't. It's hard for me. The glory of God, what does that mean? But I can look at Jesus and I can see something of glory that I can understand because he made himself a servant of no reputation. That makes sense to me. So keep that in mind as we go forward. In Luke chapter 22, another startling thing that Jesus said, which I'm sure caused everybody there to just say, I have no idea what you're talking about here. He says this, the kings of the nations lord it over their subjects, and those who have authority lord it over them who are called benefactors, but it is not to be that way with you. But the one who is greater among you, let that one become as the younger. The one who is governing become the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves the table? Isn't the one who sits at the table the greater? But I am in your midst as a servant. Wow. Think about what he's saying here. We have such investment in stratification, superiority, superior people, people who have superior abilities. All of our nation is driven toward, the whole Western world is driven towards celebrity in some way. People, why do we think, this is just fascinating to me, why do we think that somebody who makes a movie knows something that we need to know? Why do we think that they know anything more than KG knows? Or Marshall, or Becky, or anybody? They don't. But we think they do just because they've made a movie. And think about this for a moment. How many magazine articles have you read in your lifetime that were speaking about somebody who was lowly? I can't think of any. The only thing I can think of is one, Mother Teresa. Beyond that, I can't think of anybody who is literally lowly by choice, living sacrificially. There probably are some out there, but I guarantee you the numbers will tell a different story if you were to do a percentage. The numbers will always be on the side of those who are great in our eyes. It's kind of like this. I don't know if you've ever heard this said before. It fits this same paradigm of understanding. Show me your schedule, and I can tell you what's important in your life. Right? Isn't that true? If we see our weekly schedule week in and week out, it kind of tells somebody else what's important to us in our lives. Well, in the same way, the number of magazine articles about great people tell me what we think is important. And it's certainly not lowliness or servanthood. Then in John chapter 5, we see this. I by myself can do nothing. Gosh, that's not a resume enhancement at all. I judge as I hear. My judgment is righteous because I don't seek my own will, but the will of my Father who sent me. This is not, if you're looking to hire somebody, this is not a good resume enhancement here at all. Just, I can't do anything by myself. Gosh, who's going to hire that person? I read a story once, I think it was in like a Guideposts many years ago, and it went this way. King Alfred, this is the King of England in the 800s AD. And there was a war with the Danes going on, and King Alfred, obviously, this is back when what would be the equivalent of our president went out to war. The kings went out to war. They actually put on their armor and went out and swung swords and stuff. They didn't sit in the office and look at maps. And King Alfred's hiding because at this point it's not going well for the British. He's hiding in the woods, and he finds a home in the woods of a woodcutter. And so he goes into the home and he asks for food. Here's the King of England. He's hungry. Woodcutter's wife is there by herself, and she says, come on in. I'll provide you a meal. She said, on one condition. She said, I've got some bread cooking here, which is going to be the meal. I need you to watch these cakes. I've got to go out and round up the children. If you would watch these cakes, make sure they don't burn. King Alfred says, well, yes, ma'am, I'll watch the cakes for you. But then King Alfred starts thinking about his nation. He starts thinking about what's going on, and all of a sudden the cakes are smoking. They're burning. The woman comes in and she's just aghast. What in the world's the matter with you? I gave you this simple task. Now she's talking to the King of England. She doesn't know it. What's wrong with you that you couldn't watch these cakes? Well, the woodcutter came in. The woodcutter knew who it was. And his wife's yelling at the King of England. The woodcutter's he's apoplectic. What's going on? Don't you know who this is? The woman finds out who it is, and she just falls on her knees in front of the king. The king reaches down, he picks her up, he says, no, ma'am. He said, you were absolutely right to scold me. You gave me a responsibility to which I agreed. I chose to say yes, and I failed you. You were right to chastise me in a duty that I had accepted in which I had failed. I will not fail again, he said. Think about Jesus. I don't seek my own will, but the will of the one who sent me. He had been given a duty. He knew what his duty was. He fulfilled that duty. That's why the Bible makes such a big deal about the importance of being faithful in small things. The woodcutter's meal was not that big a deal. The fact of the integrity of King Alfred agreeing to watch the bread and failing was important. That was important. Jesus didn't fail at any of those things. Think about that as we go forward. And finally, in Luke chapter 23, we read this. He says, verse 34, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And then they began to divide Jesus' garments and spread them among them and cast lots for the garments. If we operate so much, I think, on reactions, on resentment. And I look at Jesus here, and I look at God Almighty, and I think, does not the maker of the universe have every right to be really resentful toward us? I think he does. And yet, you see Jesus on the cross looking at those very people who've put him up there and saying they don't know what they're doing. Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. You see, we've got a God in heaven who doesn't forget who we are. He knows that we're dust. remember reading a story, another one of those guideposts. I like those little stories because they carry a lot of weight. Stories are good. Jesus told a lot of stories, so I can see the appeal. There was a father who was just viciously hard on his son. Son couldn't do anything right. He got scolded while he was getting dressed because he would leave his clothes on the floor. He got scolded at breakfast because he spilled something. He got scolded because he ate too fast. He got scolded because he sat with his elbows on the table. He got scolded because he ran outside in his socks. I've scolded Jackson for that. Because, are you going to buy new socks? Who's going to have to buy those new socks? I'm going to have to buy the new socks. He was scolded because he left the door open when he ran outside. You know, we are so quick to reprimand people around us for places in which they fail in things that we think are important. Right? Have you ever, let me ask you a question. If you go into somebody's home and it's super messy, when you leave that home, say you go in there with a spouse or a friend, when you leave that home, do you comment on it? Man, that place was a wreck. How could we survive in there? How do they live like that? It's not important to them. It's important maybe to you or me. It's not important to them. So what business do we have even commenting on it? None. See, we expect others to perform well in places where maybe we have strength. Really important things that we think they should get right because it's important for us to get it right. And we resent people who seem to not care. Did Jesus not have every right, as God has to this very minute, to resent us? Do you think we're all walking around thinking about what's important to God all the time? I don't think we are. And yet, he comes in on a donkey's colt to Jerusalem, to the same people that are going to hang him on a cross in just a week. Not a war horse, a donkey's colt. He is teaching us what is right by being right himself, not by telling us, but by being right. And then, after all this, he lets you and me just come to him as we are. We don't have to get cleaned up. We don't have to do anything except just come and hold out our, like a small child who's been playing in the mud, our dirty little hands and ask him for mercy, and he gives it. Just says, you come on in. Think of any relationship we have and how damaging it is that we hold things over people that maybe they just don't think are important, right? God never does that. I mean, with all the failures we have, he just says, with open arms, you come on in. I'll tell you, as I come on this Palm Sunday and I think about Jesus coming in on the donkey's colt in that humble way he did, I want to become more like that. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to pray with me, I'll stay as long as it takes as we close.